If you're like me, you probably struggled at one point in your life with the whole aesthetic, organized note-taking. You probably know somebody that has font-like, beautiful handwriting and takes 15 minutes before class just to create a cute little aesthetic title at the top of their page. You might have gone out to buy different colors of highlighters, markers, and pens, thinking that you would color code your notes, so you created a whole system with a legend of which color meant what, and then you realized that you kept forgetting what color you assigned to certain things, and it wasn't very realistic to go back and find which color you needed to use for something that the teacher said would be on the test. So instead, you underlined it a lot and circled it maybe and wrote that it'll be on the test for sure, and you still forgot to go back and check it, so when you got to the test, you were pretty sure that you recognized a few words from the question and you knew that it was in your notes, but you sat there for 15 minutes gaslighting yourself into believing you would remember it just because you underlined it once 3 weeks ago. Okay, well, I did that once. Anyways, for this video, I actually researched a little bit, so I'm going to start with showing you a general overview of different popular note-taking styles, and then I'll delve into my own and talk about how I developed it. And I wouldn't really call it developing anything. I didn't make any huge breakthrough. I just found something that works for me, and I feel like sharing it, because why not? Before we fully start, I want to thank today's sponsor, a shovel. More on that later. And quick little side note, you don't have to follow my examples at all. At the end of the day, you got to do what works best for you, and if my note-taking style, as chaotic as it is, doesn't work for you, then don't do it. And if you clicked on this video thinking it would be some super aesthetic tour of my notes, that's not it. I'm chaotic. This isn't for you. Go away. Don't go away. Come back. Come back. Anyways, the first note-taking style I'm going to talk about is the Cornell Method. And while I talk about these, I'm going to banish myself into the corner. So the Cornell Method is this super laborious way of taking notes in my opinion, but it was developed by a Cornell professor in the 50s. Do you remember how I said that I was unorganized 20 to 30 seconds ago? Yeah, I don't think that taking a ruler and drawing lines all over my paper and dividing my notes into very organized sections is really going to work for me. Now that being said, I think the idea behind the Cornell Method is actually pretty good. There's some good science behind why it works, but I'll talk about that later. So the Cornell Method is designed to have a bigger note-taking area on the right, a smaller cues area on the left, and a summary area at the bottom. The way they explain to do this on a website I found is that you should take notes throughout the class on the right, skip a few lines when something new comes up, then for every major point, you should write a cue word on the left, which will be used to revisit the information after class. And I did a little sample thing here, so I'm just doing the phases, so solids, liquids, and gas. So for example, solids have a definitive shape, solids have a definitive volume, and then for the cues, I just wrote solids, because after class, I guess I would want myself to remember solids, but just in case, I also wrote volume, because the notes were more about volume and shape. So you're supposed to cover your notes with a card or something, but I have an iPad, so I'm not going to do that. And then you're supposed to recite to yourself everything that you know about the cue word or the cue question that you left yourself. And then after class, you're supposed to summarize everything at the bottom. So as sarcastic as I've been about this method, I actually think there's a lot of pros. I like the cues because it's designed in a way to get you to recite the information almost as if you were teaching it to somebody. In college, I had a professor that was really big on structuring the class around teaching other students because it promotes learning the best. So yeah, cues are fine. I think they're a good way to quiz yourself and a good way to get information back. And I think the summary is pretty good too. But I mean, if you're teaching correctly, you should kind of be doing that already. And if it helps you to write the summary, go for it. I don't, but like I said, my note-taking is a little weird. And I find that I summarize things naturally in my head and when I'm teaching other people anyways. What I find hilarious is that this website lists a ton of pros, it's systematic and efficient, and it saves time and effort, but for disadvantages, it lists none. Yeah, how about after you set up a new page, after using the extensive 6 inches of room they left you in the outline, you'll miss part of your lecture. I mean, it's ridiculous. What are you going to do? Raise your hand and tell the teacher that you have to set up a new Cornell sheet? Do you even go to Cornell? And all jokes aside, I know they sell Cornell Method notebooks, and I'm sure the note-taking apps on iPad or your laptop probably have a template you can use. But come on, why are we burdening ourselves with the Cornell boundaries? At the twilight of our mortal coil, as the tapestry unfurls for that final, fleeting second, do we really want to be reminded of the Cornell Method? Okay, moving on. These next ones should be quicker. I hate the Cornell Method. So next is the outlining method. This is also what I like to call the Word document method. Basically how it works is that you're going to categorize your main general points on the left, and as you move further right, you'll get more specific. So we have our heading, and then our main topic 1, and then our subtopic, and then just more specific as you go down the line. Essentially, it's just broader stuff on the left and more specific stuff on the right. It's a pretty safe and standard method of note-taking. I personally think it works better if you're already on like Google Docs or a Word document, because then you just go to bullet points and hit tab whenever you want to get to more specific stuff. The only disadvantage it might have is that it requires a little bit more brain power during class just to like categorize and subcategorize. But if you're okay with that and you take your notes on a laptop, then sure, go for it. I personally am not the biggest fan of this method because I used to have a teacher that like forced us to use it. I think they taught us how to use it, and then if we didn't use it during our notes, we got points taken off. And I've never ever had a teacher except that one actually grade notes and look at our notes specifically. I don't think that forcing somebody to do something is the best way to have them incorporate it into their lives, but hey, it's a good note-taking method. There's nothing wrong with it, and if you want to use it, go for it. Okay, for this one, I'm not going to put myself in the corner. I'm tired of being there and it's scary. The charting method is one of those methods that's only applicable in specific scenarios. I don't even know why it's categorized as its own note-taking method. Basically, you just chart a bunch of information that's related. Sure, I've seen this used in history classes a lot. I've seen this used in chemistry a lot. And hell, I'm sure I've used it in some of my notes too. I think in those specific cases, it's all right. It helps you categorize the facts pretty well. It's just not good for overall note-taking. You would never write your entire notes like this. I would only ever use this when the content's getting very heavy and there are a lot of similar specific things you have to memorize. But if you have an iPad or laptop and access to the slides or the book, normally the tables are already in there, so I don't think it's worth the trouble doing all this, but that's just me. If you're going to memorize something anyways, just make it easier for yourself and memorize it from the table that's been given to you. Okay, so lastly, before my own note-taking method, I want to go over some specific ones that I found and some that I think are fun. I found one called the sentence method, which is just writing your thoughts down on a piece of paper, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't call this a note-taking method. You're just writing notes. And the last one I want to bring up, because it's very, very similar to how I approach my notes, is the mapping method. Basically, you just make one giant concept map and it helps you associate ideas and promotes learning. And I think you'll soon realize why I like the associations, but I'm not the biggest fan of concept maps just because every single time I do it, they turn out like this. They're disgusting, they're lopsided, but that being said, I think they're a pretty good tool. Alright, now to the part of the video that I advertised at the beginning, but took me like 10 to 15 minutes to talk about. Alright, now for my notes. So, I developed my own style of note-taking, which as you can see is really small for some reason. I don't know why I did that, but I would zoom in really close, like literally this close. I lined it, so instead of using the lines, I would do this. And what I did is I would start creating associations. So these are real notes from a lecture in, I think, immunology that we did once. And as you can see, I use a lot of arrows. So I use arrows here, I use arrows here, and every new color was like a new association or a new thought. I think I eventually got rid of the colors, and that's why I did the bit at the beginning, because I could never remember why I did the colors. But I had this like great color palette that I just like never used. So this sort of progressed as I was going throughout college. I found myself always scared to walk into a class, not really knowing how to study and not knowing what the exams were going to look like. And I found that I performed better in classes that I attended in person. And that's a really big key point for my note-taking style. I would always go to class in person and try to stay as hyper-focused as possible for the hour to hour and a half that the session was. I found that I take notes better in a fast-paced environment, which is probably why they're so scrawled over the place and small, but it just worked for me. I found that it was normally a lot easier for me to succeed when I was hyper-focused in a class and paying attention throughout instead of zoning out, because then I would kind of remember what I wrote down, and revisiting the notes later became a lot easier. I didn't have to go learn from the book or the slides and relearn the information that was already presented. I just went back to my notes and saw what was important. And again, this is a real page from my notes. I think it's kind of just combining everything I've talked about, but a little more than that. There's a reason why I chose to do it this way. Some things I just want to point out super quickly. Again, lots of arrows, some color changes here. I drew a lot. I'll try to find other pages. I mean, I have a few more pages we can go through, but I did draw a lot. And then I highlighted a lot too. Usually the things I highlighted were things that were going to be on exams or things that were really important. And as you can see, I naturally did some things like the charting method here. I didn't draw the lines or anything, but I needed to know the signaling beacons for the immunoglobulins, and I wrote it out. So it's not really just one method. It's part charting, part mapping, a lot of associations, and definitely not the Cornell method. Now, I do want to say I definitely didn't write every single thing down because I think that was pointless. We got the slides anyways, and if the professor was saying something, I would just learn to listen and figure out what was actually important from it. I'm also pretty bad at learning from a textbook, and it's harder for me to create associations when I'm reading like paragraphs of information and I'm highlighting it or writing down every line or every word that's important. So just by being focused and being able to recognize what was important, it helped me a lot when studying later. And I like the idea of comparing my note-taking style to writing a story, not in the way that I'm like an author writing some very captivating piece of work, but I've seen interviews recently of different authors, and I think most recently the creators of South Park talking about how to create an effective story. And basically the whole idea is that when you're writing a story, if you have one piece of information and like one thing happens, and then the second thing happens, and then the third thing happens, it's not a very good cohesive story. Now on the other end, you have thing one happens, therefore thing two happens. There's a cause and effect relationship, and it makes things easier to enjoy instead of just having one thing and the other thing and no reason behind it. So sort of unintentionally I started doing this. I didn't know about these interviews beforehand, but I found it interesting that creating the associations in my notes translated to me doing better on exams. Especially for my program, I think a lot of our classes were preparing us for medical school, so it's better to know what happens when one body system is connected to another, not just what those two body systems are responsible for. Because on a quiz or exam, you might see a question that talks about, well, if we introduce some sort of pathogen or some sort of medication at step 1, what happens way down the line at step 5? And I do quickly want to point out that there are times that learning a lot of information quickly in bulk is very important. You don't always have to create associations. I know for the MCAT specifically, there's a lot of fundamental knowledge that you need to know to prepare for it, and I used Anki through spaced repetition to just learn a bunch of facts. I didn't dive deep into any of that. There were times where I might have needed to know the very basics of hormones or the amino acid structure, and it's a lot easier to memorize that before creating the associations. So I'm not saying to completely ignore the fundamentals, just make sure you reinforce everything else with the fundamentals. Naturally, the human brain craves patterns and connections, so when you're doing that in class or doing that for the first step, it helps you a lot down the line. And another good part about forming associations, I think, is revisiting your notes as well. It sort of naturally reinforces the double pass or the triple pass method, where you can go back through everything, and since you know what you wrote down and you were focused during class, going through those notes just became a lot easier. You saved a lot of time. It was so much easier for me to find the information that I knew was in my notes than to look through hundreds of slides and textbook pages hoping to find the word I needed. And on that note, I think that the double and triple pass method is just a good study habit to have. If you look at the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, it shows just how quickly you forget information if you don't have consistent review sessions. And I knew a lot of people who took days to study and remember something that took me a few hours throughout the week to learn. I really think it boils down to just being super focused in lecture if you can manage, and then creating those associations naturally so that when you come back to review, it becomes a lot easier overall. Okay, well, I think I've been rambling for long enough. I do want to thank everybody for the first video. I wasn't expecting that to get, I think, over 100 views now, so I guess I'll just keep talking about things that I'm not really qualified to talk about. I'm also posting this without telling everybody, so if you did watch it, give me a heck yeah. Unless I told you. Then don't give me a heck yeah, you little liar. The last thing is that my parents found out that I didn't graduate with a 4.0 because of the last video, and they're threatening to kick me out of the house. So please, God, support me. I need the money, please. Okay, be safe. Drink water. Bye.